You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
Hello, and welcome to Barbell Logic, Beast Over Burden. I'm your host, Niki Sims, the CXO at Barbell Logic, and I'm a coach of strength and nutrition. With me is Andrew Jackson. He's the COO and also a strength coach and nutrition coach. Hello, Andrew.
Howdy.
Question for you. How has sneezing been lately?
Not fun.
What's going on?
Had some sort of rib tweak. I was stubbornly not loosening my belt as I've kind of put on a little bit of summer fun fluff around the waist. And
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Tried to convince myself that I was the same belt size for a heavy set of 5. It was 425 or something like that. And rep 3 felt this weird peeling kind of sensation. I don't know how else to describe it.
Peeling?
Almost like...
Oh, God.
I thought for a split second, I was like, was that a hernia? You know, it just sort of felt like something not in the right place, followed by a sharp stabbing movement or a sensation.
These adjectives are really pretty graphic. Did an alien crawl out of your body?
No aliens. And it wasn't so bad. I mean, I did it on the 3rd rep for what was supposed to be a set of 5. I thought, well, I think I might be able to just kind of grit this out. So I did a 4th rep on the squat. It was pretty much, it was almost like a pause at the bottom because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stand back up with this. It would have been a 5RM, like, or at least a recent 5RM, not a lifetime, but heaviest I've gone for a set of 5. Went down and felt another stab kind of right in the rib cage, bottom of the rib cage. Was able to stand back up with it, but figured, I don't know what this is yet, so I'm just going to rack it. And ever since then, sneezing has definitely been painful. Some of them are not too bad, and then other times I get this weird lingering ache for 30 or 45 seconds. It's kind of weird. I suspect some sort of connective tissue or something just got tweaked, but the ribs are definitely a frustrating thing to rehab. So
yeah, you really feel it in those normal human movements.
Yeah.
In a very painful way. Yeah. Have you squatted with a belt since then?
Yeah, I've been gradually putting it back on a little bit tighter and tighter. I did 3x5 at probably about 70% on Monday. It wasn't too bad to the point where, you know, I can get through the set, but it's definitely not fun. So, yeah, just another thing you got to train around. I don't know. I'm going to try squatting again today, see how it goes.
Too bad it's allergy season of the fall. Yeah, I hope it goes well. So maybe an important lesson of not wearing your belt super tight.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody about that. Like 90% of the time, a rib tweak or injury is going to be probably wearing the belt too tight.
Yeah.
So it's, if you find yourself spilling over significantly, it might be time to loosen it a hole.
Loosen up, man. Loosen up.
How's your training going?
It's been pretty good. Yeah, training is good. Working on a lot of body weight stuff, body weight machine stuff, lots of leg presses, lunges, quad work, getting under the bar again for some squats.
Yeah.
Squatting 95 pounds today. Pretty exciting stuff.
It's exciting when it doesn't hurt though, right?
Yeah, the thing that I'm excited about is that I'm not nervous about it. So I'm pretty stoked about that. And then I have got some heavy belt squats after that, which those are really satisfying. And then a bunch of hip thrusts. So fun day ahead. Did a fun chin-up workout yesterday, some spin.
Oh yeah. You know, I've been kind of dealing with some form of back pain for the last year or two. And this rib tweak instantly removed any thought about my back. Now all I can think about is the rib. So, you know, might be good distraction technique. I mean, I guess what prompted that was you talking about not being nervous about your back, because I'm no longer nervous about my back. Attention is 100% on the rib now. And it's as if I'm not even dealing with a back thing. So
Amazing. That's called the stab protocol. We've got the star protocol, and now we have the rib stab protocol. Well, like injuries kind of ties into what I was curious to talk about today, is that moment that we hear from clients, or when I've even written to a coach, where something happens. Often it's they go on vacation, or maybe they experience an injury. You get into this state of mind, me speaking as a client, where you want to blow up your current training program and think about messaging your coach and being like, I want to do this and this and this now. I don't want to do this anymore. I want this. And often it comes in a state of being highly emotional. And there is sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to put that all on the coach. And I thought it might be interesting to talk about how to move from that really highly emotional state where there's something that needs to be addressed, but turn it into a more successful thought process that can allow you to make little tweaks and still get what you want and still appreciate where that might be coming from, and then be able to communicate it to your coach who is helping you along that path. Have you ever experienced that before from a client or from being a client?
I mean, without getting too, armchair psychologist about it, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just dealing with emotions in general. And I've personally been working on it a lot over the last 5-10 years, I guess you could say, that I noticed that a lot of my life has been spent living in reaction to my emotions. And so, we could go down a whole rabbit hole, maybe get Dr. Peter on here to talk about the psychological aspect of things. But for me, the first step is acknowledging and just even noticing that I have an emotion present, instead of it just immediately becoming my identity and taking action on it. I think that's the dark side of being an action-oriented person. I can get a lot of things done, but I can also react and want to satisfy myself by acting, just doing something. And often in reaction to an emotion is not usually the most helpful thing. So I guess step one, I would say, is acknowledge, notice, and allow the emotion to be there. I think that's maybe another aspect of it. Is I'm in the context that you're talking about, if it's translating to wanting to adjust or take action to change your program, and you haven't even noticed that you have a emotion that's present, which maybe this is more common with dudes, I don't know, but often just acknowledging that it's there and feeling like, or making the choice to allow the emotion to exist and be like, okay, it's okay that I'm feeling this right now. Let me just kind of sit with this, ride the emotion, and let it pass through, because reacting to an emotion is often not going to be obviously a rational thing. So I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but I think there is a psychological aspect of just allowing yourself to have emotions and let those pass through before acting.
Yeah. And often when you act on it right away, your emotions now become someone else's responsibility to quell or to answer to. And that's rather unfair. Like you said, if you take responsibility for them, and it doesn't mean you should, put them in a little jar and put them on the shelf. Like, you still need to experience the emotion, but I think it is helpful to let some time pass. I think even like 90 seconds between an emotional spike and an action is a good amount of time to give yourself to kind of breathe and let your lizard brain calm down a little bit before you do anything that is going to make your life harder, or before you throw that into someone else's lap to deal with.
Yeah. For me, like, I'll often notice like a physical pressure in my temples, one of the things that comes up for me. And sometimes just by acknowledging it and being, allowing myself to feel angry or whatever it is that I'm feeling, that in itself will relieve that pressure. As a coach, when I see somebody react and it appears that there might be some emotion involved,
Yeah.
I struggle and work on this professionally as well, that it gets really tempting to react to somebody else's emotional reaction. And that is never a good thing. And especially as a coach, if the first thing you do is react to somebody else's reaction, now you're just you're hooked in a downward spiral. And that's been one of the biggest challenges I've had professionally, for sure.
And that can happen on Slack. It can happen in DMs, but it tends like the dangerous stuff there is when it really happens, like highly emotional over some sort of format or medium that's not an actual live conversation.
Right. Which we, as online coaches, are often in that medium. And so I think I mean, the one that comes up for me with respect to clients and strength training is you get that workout from a client who leaves the comment, they're closing out the workout, they're pissed off about something that didn't go right, and you kind of get that emotional dump in the comment section. And often when you check in on that the next day, they're in a totally different state, but you often get that very raw emotional download right at the end of a workout. Have you seen that before?
Oh, yeah. And I've totally done it to my poor coaches who have had to put up with me in the past, where it's just like,
Yeah.
I didn't hit a new PR today and I thought I was going to, and this is all your fault. Something snarky, or I thought that would feel lighter, like something passive aggressive. And it's, you kind of in that moment where you have the workout open to just drop a comment. And then, the next day, or then your coach reads it and then they have to be like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? And what are we going to do about that? And yeah, that can be uncomfortable. So
how do you deal with those?
Well, I was thinking about it more in a way that could help us like turn that into a useful conversation, but also a way to take responsibility for what you're experiencing. And I think that comes from taking yourself out of that very moment, right when it just happened, that last 30 seconds, and think about things in a couple of different ways. Like think about maybe what happened over the last 24 hours that led to this, and sometimes what happened over the last 3 weeks that led to this highly emotional state. So that's looking in the past. And then think about the future. Like, were you expecting something different to be occurring? And did your expectations of what was going to happen over the next 8 weeks all of a sudden change? So looking back the last 24 hours or the last 3 weeks, an example of that would be you thought you were going to hit a new PR. You had it in your mind that you were going to hit a new PR. But over the last 3 weeks, training wasn't going super well. You were not eating in a stable way, maybe in a deficit, maybe overdoing it, maybe drinking a lot, maybe not sleeping enough. And you have, you spend 2 days finally getting your act together, and you expect this training day to show the last 2 days. But in reality, the last big chunk of time was not supporting that training day that was important to you. So that could be an issue. And then if you look back over the last 24 hours, maybe you had a really stressful life event occur. You didn't sleep. Maybe you actually got hurt, or you tweaked something during the workout, and all of a sudden that's changed what you can expect moving forward. And so looking back, taking yourself out of that moment of the last minute or whatever, and giving yourself some context, I think is really helpful, because you can see what you may or may not have done to contribute to this moment where your expectations were not met.
It's interesting because that reminds me of an exercise that a coach had me work on in the past, where she had me break down the scenario into a sequence of defining the circumstance, identifying the thought that occurs or that is happening, the emotion that is elicited from that thought, and then the action that's taken in reaction to that emotion. And then kind of reflecting on the loop that's occurring there. Often the action then reinforces the circumstance, thought, feeling, action.
So there's a circumstance, and then there was a thought, and then there was an emotion, and then there are the actions that could take place.
Yeah, so this was like a journaling exercise.
Okay, got it.
And the crux of it with the circumstance was to write the circumstance as objectively as possible. So somewhat like what you're talking about doing, reflect on the current state and try to describe it in a way that's removed from your thoughts or expectations or your emotional bias. And, the circumstance might be, I missed my PR attempt.
Yeah.
Something like that. Or I didn't sleep well. Fill in whatever the blank circumstance, or I injured my rib. And then step 2, identify the thought that you have in that circumstance, separate from the circumstance. Step 3, what's the emotion that comes up when you have that thought? And then step 4, what action do you take? And it's just a way of, I think, doing a version of what you talked about in a structured way, where you just sort of like dissect and separate out the elements of all the things happening internally and try to be as objective as possible about what's really occurring, what I'm thinking, feeling, and doing, so that you can then, the next piece was to, once you've got those kind of all separated and independent of each other, gives you a little bit more of a framework to see the whole picture and then decide, instead of in reaction to your emotion, what do I actually want to do? And try to then move forward with an action that's a little bit more clear, or at least less muddled by thoughts and emotions that might not really actually have anything to do with the circumstance.
Yeah.
They're just your thought and your emotions that come up in that circumstance.
Yeah. Which is, usually something about being afraid, being angry, being insecure. And I like that when you write that out, you can see the many choices that you have about the actions you can take.
Exactly.
You can write any action down, and you can, even just by that exercise, really let it sink in that you can do many of different things.
Right. I've done that as a client, and then as a coach, that's something that I try to, just like what you were talking about, help the client reflect on the circumstances or the things that got them to where they're at, and weigh the pros and cons of whatever the next action is to take.
And then you can have a conversation that I think should also be informed by what is important to you in the future. Because there are instances where it's like an injury or being sick or something that really is acute. And then I think there are needs for conversation like this when your expectations have changed and they haven't been communicated, or maybe you haven't realized that they've changed. And your training program is designed to work towards a goal that you and your coach have agreed on. And sometimes I think expectations shift a little bit. And if they aren't communicated, you're going to kind of be building up resentment for this training program that isn't getting to you what you actually want. And I think some examples of that are when, we're building or we're doing a program to build muscle, and then all of a sudden someone sees himself in a swimsuit, or they feel uncomfortable all of a sudden about their body weight. And so they start eating in a deficit. And then training starts to feel terrible because your coach didn't know that that's all of a sudden what you wanted. And you get a little angry about your program when you start missing stuff because you don't see the trade-offs that are now on the table when you do something like that. You were smirking, which means...
Yeah, well, I had the whole time you were talking about that, the scene from The Notebook was flashing through my head, where
I think you've seen that more than I have.
the Ryan Gosling Jr. is like, gets to the point where he's like yelling at his girlfriend, like, "What do you want? What do you want? Just say
And she's
it."
like, "It's not that easy."
Yeah, exactly. She's like, "It's not that easy." I often think that's at the crux of the issue, is trying to figure out what do you actually want.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what I think you were talking about, the exercise of stepping back and trying to reflect on things, the circumstance, thought, feeling, action. It all sort of boils down to trying to figure out, as a client and also as a coach, trying to help your client figure out, okay, what do you actually want? And simultaneously have to wrestle with and, accept that constant reality, that famous quote, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs." And I think we've talked about it in a couple of different episodes, like the build muscle, lose weight episode, where, at some point, something's got to give. Unfortunately, we can't have it all. We have to figure out which trade-offs we're willing to make, and understand that the thing we want is going to come with some sort of trade-off.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
Yeah. And I like when a coach is able to lay those out. Be like, okay, if you really want this, this is how it's going to feel. These are the things that we may not be able to do, which at one point you did want to do. Are you okay with that?
Right.
Because if you don't know about the trade-offs, you might think that you can have everything you want. Well, sometimes you can, but like, I think you have to be fully aware of what you're signing up to have and what you're signing up to not have.
Right. And the popular word to use now is seasons. And I think that's another consideration when you have a big reaction or
Like seasons of training, seasons of life.
yeah. So, sometimes that reaction is a loss of perspective on there being different seasons and feeling stuck
Yeah.
in a season, or thinking this is the way it's going to be forever. Like you said, you look in the mirror, the swimsuit's fitting a different way, or you miss a rep, you miss a PR attempt, and it feels like this is the way it's going to be forever, or this structure or this season of life is the way it's going to be. And that's another aspect, I think, of stepping back, which I think maybe is what you were kind of alluding to, is thinking about more, what do you want to be in the future? Or maybe it's just, what season are we in right now? And what do we want to prioritize? Is it time to shift? So, I guess that's an interesting question I have for you is like, how do you know, let's say you've stepped back, we've done step one of getting clear on what is real, what's really happening right now, what are the circumstances, thoughts, feelings, scenarios, and options. How do you decide whether it's time to change the program or let things be for a little bit longer?
One kind of red flag, green flag that I thought about was if I'm using words that are really, I guess, binary, where it's like, I never blankety blank, I always blankety blank. This is what it's going to be like forever. And just really final terms that kind of just create this illusion that I've been doing one thing forever and ever when I likely haven't. So watching for words like that, and instead using phrases like, I noticed that, and it seems like, that actually start to weigh in more trends and habits rather than just really kind of closed-minded terms. So if I find that I'm speaking in terms like that, then that might mean that I need to take a bigger look at what I've been doing and see if that there's anything I can change in my behaviors that would get me better aligned with my program, assuming I still want the same thing that I did 6 weeks ago or whatever. So examples would be, eating more calories than I was when I first got on this track, or doing more than I was supposed to do in programming. Sometimes people will do that. I've definitely done that, where you have the program for your coach, but then you do extra reps, you do a bunch of extra cardio, and your training is a lot more than what's on the paper. And that kind of adds up. And so if I find that there's something that I can take responsibility for and change on my own and double check with my coach that it's still kind of moving towards what I want, then the thing that would change is me and not my program. But if I articulated my goals and my coach and I were on the same page, and I find that my goals are now different than what I want in the next 8 to 12 weeks, not in the next 2 weeks, then I think that's a chance to change the program actually and have a conversation about trade-offs and availability and fatigue and desires for the training itself. What about you?
The first thing that came up to me was asking the question, is the client progressing or no? And it doesn't necessarily have to be that everything is progressing. If you've got that PR attempt and they tapered up to it, that'd be something where I'd probably change the structure of the program. I have fewer and fewer, if any, of my athlete clients that are tapering. I just find that unless they're competing, it's almost never the structure that I use anymore. So if it's just a fluke missed rep, I usually take that on as my own responsibility to figure out how to tweak the variables of the program. The scenarios that come up more for me, I think, are less reaction to a rep in the moment, although that does occasionally happen, but I do get a fair number of life circumstance changes that elicit some sort of a reaction. And I think if there's a big life circumstance change, that is almost always a good reason to revisit and, mix up the structure, whether it's going on a vacation, coming back from a vacation, new job, new kid, fill in the blank. I guess would say that I would always err on the side of keeping the program the same unless the client is not motivated to keep doing it and they're just bored of the program to the point that they're not doing the workouts or their life circumstances changed enough.
It's like if something changes on either end of what you want to get out of the program or what you have to put into the program.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
And if those two things have significantly changed, then it's time to change the program.
Yep. I would agree.
Yeah. Resources and outcome.
I would not have said it that way, but I think that's a very concise way of summarizing it.
Yeah, that'll help me too. Yeah, you talking about it made me think of it that way. So that was a good non-concise way to get there.
It is interesting, though, that I think that most people in conversations about programming talk about it as if like those variables are constant. You just put somebody on a program and theoretically they're supposed to all get the same results when what you want to get out and what you have to put in variables are constantly changing.
They're huge. Yeah. What you want to put into it is vast. That includes the whole first part of your life and how you were born into that point. Your genetics, your time, what equipment you have, how you eat,
right?
How long you've been training, all of that factors into it. And then what you want to get out of it would be, do you want to gain muscle? Do you want to maintain? Do you want to have it support other activities and hobbies?
This is why I think templates are very difficult to get productive long-term benefit from.
Yeah. So many differences on either side.
Unless you know how to modify a template, or unless the template is so short that you can control those two major variables. But the value of a coach is not, I don't think, just writing the program for the next session or the next week. It's that they are able to understand in depth all the variables involved and create something that's specific to the constantly changing variables of your life. Sure, there's periods of time where you can run a fairly, consistent program or structure for a while, but most normal people are not writing out 16 weeks to follow to the letter with no other major variables training. And if you look at most templates that are out there, they're written for or by people who were preparing for powerlifting competitions and trying to taper and peak. They have 12 to 16 weeks of time that they can dedicate, and they taper in some sort of block fashion. And with a coach that is not necessarily always preparing for a meet, you can have somebody that adjusts in real time, even day to day, week to week, to how things are progressing and how those two major variables are changing, and to help you think through those trade-offs if and when you have those moments of, this isn't working for me, and understand the context of the situation, the trade-offs of the paths forward, and take the right action, or at least help you choose which direction you want to go.
Yeah. The value of coaching a human and not coaching a spreadsheet.
Right.
Awesome. Well, I think our coaches at Barbell Logic are pretty good at that. So if you want to give that a shot, head on over to barbelllogic.com. We have a really cool survey you can take where you can figure out how to get matched with a coach based on where you're coming from and what you want to get out of your training. It's pretty rad. But that'll wrap us up here for Barbell Logic, Beast Over Burden. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us. And if you got something out of it, we'd love to hear about it. Give us a review, give it a share, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.